Hi, everybody. Welcome back. This is Mike Gormley, and I am with Laurence Juber, guitarist extraordinaire. More so than I even realized. Now that we've been talking to him for a while, I knew his credits were amazing, but you're, I don't know, you're up there very high in the list of world-renowned guitarists. Um, I wanted to what what's going on with guitars now? I'm stuttering a little bit because I'm not sure, but this electronica is in, and so many different inventions are happening and so on. Uh, I listen to you play acoustic guitar, which sounds wonderful, but you must have to almost go to class again every 6 months or so to find out what else is going on.
Um, you know, I mean, back in the 70s, I had one of the first guitar synthesizers. And even when I was in college, I mean, we had an electronic music lab. So there's nothing that different about what's going on these days, other than the fact that the digital technology kind of, on one level, made things simpler, but on another level, made things more complicated because there's more stuff to try and understand. But in 1977, I'd show up a recording session with 5 or 6 acoustic guitars, a couple of electric guitars, and a case full of pedals. And that's pretty much what I do today.
Hmm.
Because the basic technology really hasn't changed, and still, the analog realm has a lot to offer in terms of guitar tones.
Mhm.
Um, but we can certainly accomplish a lot with digital technology, and I've got all manner of boxes that will do weird and wonderful things, but at the end of the day, 90% of what you deal with as a guitar player is rhythm guitar anyway,
Hmm.
and the other 10% is really kind of that area of where are you going stylistically. I mean, a good blues guitar sound, is still basically a Stratocaster through a Fender or a Marshall amp and some kind of pedal to give it a boost. Um, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And I was a fairly early adopter of MIDI back in the 80s, when it first came out, and so I was fairly rapidly able to put myself in a position where I could use the technology to compose for movies and television too.
Most guitarists, particularly electric, I find, know the instrument inside out and can take it apart and rebuild it and probably add things to it and that sort of thing. And do you approach the guitar in that way as well?
Up to a point. I mean, I have wired up a Stratocaster just because it was kind of a cool thing to do. I'd rather leave that to the people who do it best. But certainly, I mean, I have a workbench at the back of the studio here, and I can do the basic kind of maintenance stuff, but really, I mean, there are people who do it a lot better than me. But with electric guitar, especially the kind of the modular instruments like Stratocasters, are not that hard to work on. And you can kind of one can change pickups or hardware fairly easily. It gets more difficult with like a semi-hollow body guitar like a 335, because then you've got to start getting it under the hood in ways that aren't particularly user friendly. So I'll keep my distance from that. But in reality, I mean, most of what I deal with in terms of maintenance is just changing strings. And I have my own signature string with Martin
Uh-huh.
guitars,
And
and
yet there's a signature guitar.
there was for over 20 years. There was a production signature guitar model. Um, we're done with that now, because where I've got to in terms of the evolution of my personal instrument has taken it to the point where it can only really happen in the custom shop.
Uh,
Because I require a particular kind of glue and a particular kind of finish and things that aren't necessarily in kind of the normal run of a production instrument. Um, so at this point, I've kind of reached, reached a plateau from
Mm.
that point of view.
I find it interesting in reading your bio that you actually started out on the lute. Is that accurate?
Yeah, on the lute, but I took up the lute when I was in college because it was
Ah,
great for extra credit. And I
oh,
was also fascinated with Renaissance English lute music because the reality is, as you know, with the ambition to be a professional guitar player, that understanding the fact that professional players of fretted instruments really go back to like the 9th century.
mm.
It's like there are records of personal oudists and lutenists um, to caliphs and kings in Europe, going back that far. But there was always something fascinating to me about the nature of the music and the fact that there was so much improvisation in it too. That even though the published tablatures for lute would have, a theme and then variations, we know that, those variations were improvised
Mhm.
in reality. And so that always interested me, is that, how a musician could make a living in that era, and also what was involved in making a living in that era, and what the expectation was in terms of repertoire and just the general skill set.
Uh-huh. It, is it accurate to say it's the great grandfather of the guitar?
Mm, not exactly. I mean, because the guitar has its own lineage, but
Mhm.
certainly the kind of a very senior uncle.
Uncle, okay,
Yeah.
we'll go with that.
Because you go back to the Renaissance, and the Renaissance guitar was almost more like a modern ukulele in terms of it being a small instrument,
Uh,
although those were tended to be double strung, but they were tuned very similar to the way a ukulele is tuned. And then in the Baroque era, the guitar gained an extra string. Then in the classical era, became a 6-string instrument. So it went from 4 to 5 to 6 actual courses, because a course could be 1 or 2 strings. And they often use double strings because gut wasn't always that reliable in terms of the kind of pitch you could get out of it. So you have 2 strings together, it kind of gives you a little bit of a kind of a natural chorusing effect, kind of like
is
what
it
a 12-string guitar does.
is it seen and heard anywhere these days? Is it made use of the lute?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are lutenists.
Mhm.
I mean, anytime a Baroque opera gets performed, there'll be, could be more than one lute, could be lute, Baroque guitar, um, and various members of that family. I mean, keyboards really didn't become kind of prominent instruments until the 17th century.
Uh, that's an interesting history there. Um, we are winding down to another commercial, uh, and we will be back pretty soon, I believe.
Okay.
Uh, this is Mike Gormley, and we're chatting with Laurence Juber, guitarist extraordinaire and member of Wings, you may remember, and we'll be back in a minute or two.